What's up, man?
Hey, it's snowing where you are. That's what I know. That's what I've heard multiple times, not just from you, but also those in Training Peaks. Yeah, it is apparently not spring for everybody.
No, and I think I'm going to go out in it because it might be my last shot.
I was going to say, dude, I think right now, I mean, it's full on appreciation phase.
It's gnarly, but
yeah, it's like, you know, appreciate the warm weather, appreciate the cold weather, because, I mean, we have about a month, right? The month of, I think, April to May, and then the month of October, November is about the only 2 months a year where everybody's pretty much happy. Weather's pleasant. You're kind of like in that, you're in no man's land. You're straddling the fence between cold and hot. You're not really wishing for colder. You're not really, not most people, right? You're not wishing for warmer. You're just right there. You're in the Robbie Bruce temp. You're in hoodies and shorts, which is, I mean, it's a proven mood booster. I mean, everybody's in a better mood when you can wear a hoodie and shorts. But then about a month later, it gets to be like 80 and everybody's like, oh God, so hot. Like, I don't even know that I could do my runs outside and I'm biking and it's really wearing on me. And then next thing you know, you're like that for like 5 months and you hit October, November and you're like, oh, this is it. Back to hoodies and shorts weather, perfect run weather, dew points down, humidity's down. It's getting a little bit of that seasonal EPO. And then December hits, the first snow, and you're like, fuck this. Like, when is it going to get warmer again? So yeah, we're kind of stuck in that like no man's land, I think, of really appreciating, because let's be honest, first off, like we always talk about the weather, which just shows how old we are. That's like what old people do. Talk about the weather. But there's many things to appreciate about all seasons, right? We appreciate the hot. It has a lot of benefits. We appreciate the cold. It makes you feel alive, and appreciate the in-betweens because it's, pretty much perfect. So there's a lot to appreciate about all of this. If it's snowing where you are and it's sleeting, get out. Because guess what? In a month and a half, you're going to be looking back and be like, man, I really wish I was back to running in like 30-degree weather, because this can be hot, humid, and dewy.
When did you say that window is where everybody's happy? Because I'm going to keep an eye out for that. I haven't seen that in a while.
That's right. I'll put a note in Training Peaks for all coaches, and then I'll mark the beginning of the calendar for all athletes. It's basically the third week of May through the third week of April through like the second week of May. Because the kids get out of school and then it's all a shit show. And then you got to summer and nobody's happy anymore. And then you got maybe mid-October to Thanksgiving and then the leaves are changing. The cool fall weather is upon us. You're not really as stressed anymore because most of your races are out of the way. And then it's right before the holidays, because holidays are pretty stressful. Kids are still in school. Those are like your 4 to 6 week blocks of, listen, if you can't be happy during those periods, you ain't going to be happy.
Man.
But yeah, keep an eye out, man. Keep an eye out.
That is really demoralizing.
Yes, I mean, it's not really
Why
true.
Why are people so unhappy, man?
What's that?
Why are people so unhappy most of the time?
I don't know. People got to be happy or sort of appreciate the things. I mean, we got it pretty much made in the shade in most areas. So, but speaking of being unhappy and personality changes, not too much going on for the weekend racing wise. Lots of couple half marathons, couple fulls. This is kind of like that no man's land period. You get back and going full on blast for Ironman Texas, which we'll do like a race preview for that, because on the pro side, because it looks like one of the most loaded fields outside of the World Championships that I've seen in a while. And that's, as with all races, if they all make it to the starting line. But it's absolutely loaded. And it should be a really, really exciting race. So we'll get into that here in next week? Yeah, before that race goes live. But yeah, today I was sitting on the couch last night, just got home from hockey around 7:30, and I had a text from an athlete. It was like, hey, don't know when you guys are doing a Q&A anytime soon, but had a question for you. And he dropped a few in there, but the one of them that I thought was interesting. I think he's kind of like pitting the two against each other in a way, but he said, as a coach, who do you think makes the best triathlete? The type A personality, data driven, obsessive personality, always consistent, getting it done. Everything is black and white, or the more relaxed athlete, that just kind of go with the flow, which one makes a better athlete. And then if you have one of those two, do you have to change? And obviously you do as a coach, right? You have all different kinds of personalities. How do you change your coaching philosophy around the type of athlete's personality? And I thought it was a really great question because listen, there is definitely, in my experience, you may feel differently, but in my experience, there is no perfect recipe for the type A and the type B. Even if you look at professionals, right? A lot of them you probably wouldn't even consider type A if you were just hanging out having coffee with them, because they have coaches, sports scientists, teams that are all doing the type A work for them. They just have to go out and get the job done, right? But they have to be very, very committed. They have to be very, very consistent. They got to get out there every single day and get the job done. As a coach, if you had to ask me, like, which person, would I want to coach the most, or do I think is the easiest to coach? It's actually kind of a blend, because on one end, it's kind of like I feel like I'm an extrovert in some situations. I feel like I'm an introvert in some situations. I don't think you want someone who's all the way in any direction, because it does make it very, very, very challenging. Because, like, for example, like type A athletes, they're all, not all, but a lot of them are thieves. They compare everything. You'll go out for just a simple 35-minute run, and they'll go back to April 12th. 2017 and look at the same run they did and try to match, pull over on double screens and be like, hey, well, this, my heart rate drift and this one's a little bit different. They're totally obsessed about the data. They're very, very black and white. There's not much gray. A lot of times those type A athletes also struggle with context. To me, that's one of the more difficult parts when you deal with like a type A person, is the lack of, or the inability to explain things in context, like how things feel. It's more of it is what it is. There is no, it's right or it's wrong. It's black or it's white. It's my way or the highway. There really is no in between. So there's also a big lack of flexibility. They can be very, very rigid, and they can also just want to see all green and training peaks, which is also a problem, because that means, not just means, that does say and show that a lot of times they're actually doing sessions they probably shouldn't be doing. Right. And because they lack the ability, not all, but sometimes they struggle with the ability to provide context or to be willing to, be flexible. They do things that they shouldn't. Going back to, some of the topics in the last few weeks about stress, like if you're asking them to be in the range of 190 to 210, they're going to be in that range of 190 to 210. And it could be hell or high water. It could be 4 hours sleep. It could be 10 hours sleep. It could be stress. It could be no stress. It could be, drinking 6 margaritas. It could be drinking straight water. Whatever it is, they're going to get it done, because to them, that is the measure of success, is checking the box. And so there are a lot, but again, they also have the ability to make things happen and get things done regardless of the situation. They're the ones that are, packing up their stuff when they go on trips and make sure they get their training. And they're the ones that are traveling with their bike trainer. They're the ones that can get to the hotel at 6:30 at night and want to get their training done still, because to them that matters and they want to check that box. So on the type A side, I'll shut up on the type A first, but there are benefits, there are drawbacks. I would say, though, on a racing standpoint, I think type A's generally, over type A's, tend to struggle on race day, in my experience, because they are so obsessed. And this part of your job as a coach, right, to get them off that ledge, that's like a finite number, and to get them to relax more, that they can get so attached to a number or a miles per hour or a race goal. That's obviously a metric or a time, that any deviation from that is a failure, or they don't have the ability to deviate. Kind of going back to the earlier podcast this week about, being adjust on the fly, they have a really hard time adjusting, right? If the plan is the plan and everything goes accordingly, they knock the plane out of the water. But if one thing goes awry, my form goggles aren't downloading, my ERG is stuck, my Zwift crashed, it's like the end of the universe. And so again, there's positives, right? Just like all things, right? Positive being an extrovert, positive being an introvert. There's a lot of positive, but there's also a lot of areas where, as a coach, you have to be very cognizant and aware of the kind of person that they are and how you're setting them up for success or how you're setting them up for failure.
Yeah. As a coach, I have both types. And then, I was thinking, because there is what they call a type C athlete, which is kind of a combination of both. And then also has maybe some unique traits on their own that they kind of develop. And I think maybe that's where I'm at, is even as a type C, because I look at, how I grew up. I used to be really in class, in school. I was a business major, so I was really good, believe it or not, at accounting and things like that, which were, things that have to always kind of add up and formulaic and all that sort of stuff. And so I get that side of it. I have a lot of athletes, both sides. I think some type A athletes coming to me to kind of chill out a little bit, and that works for a while. But it's hard. I think people have their things, and, type A athletes sort of had this ambition, hard driving, competitive need to see the things. And I am the other way most of the time, but I fight it. I think I need to see that type A stuff. It's like the numbers, it's almost like it's a confirmation of actually doing something. You can kind of see it in numbers. And I definitely need that, but I always fight it. It's like, I feel like if I just did something and it felt good and I worked hard and I know it deep in my soul, then that's all I really need. But there has to be, sort of justification or sort of kind of like a record. And that's tough. And it's really interesting though, because I have some really super type B athletes. And like, I've got one guy who every day is like red, but there's a comment in there and I'm like, oh shit. And he's like, great workout. And that's all he put in there. Like, there's no metrics or anything. He just kind of just does it and then doesn't even put anything in there. He's not synced up or anything. So it's just amazing. And it is a little jarring for me at times, because I'm like, man, I hope I'm, doing the right stuff or whatever. And he's just kind of going through life and doing his thing. So it's interesting, I don't necessarily think, I think about, obviously you have to have a competitive streak in you, but like you're saying, you also have to be kind of laid back on it and relaxed to perform at your best too. So there's this, I don't know. I just think it's, it's probably really a combination of both. I think a lot about, pro athletes or, people on, we talk about the Final Four and how big of a stage that is. And, like at what point, I think, even one of the coaches said it, if I have to get, fire them up for something like this, then, they're not the right guy for the team or whatever, because you have to have that internal fire, but you also have to have an unbelievable amount of chill. I watch, like a lot of these professional athletes, and they just seem so calm, so there's obviously some kind of balance there between a hard driving Michael Jordan, but a guy also that is just so relaxed and can rise to the highest levels because he's not overthinking stuff. So, yeah,
I was amazed, as much as a Tennessee fan can hate Florida. I was always amazed watching Walter Clayton Jr. and seeing that he basically never had a facial expression.
Yeah, those are the guys, right?
But like a stone cold-blooded killer, like no conscience. Yeah, it's interesting. So here's a question for you: what would you consider me, type A or type B?
You're a type A lean.
What's a type A lean? What's a type A lean? So I'm in the middle, but I tend to lean type A.
Yeah, I think you've got a crossover quality about you. I think just generally, if led to your own devices, you would want it to be laid out. And
agreed. Yeah. So listening to you talk about the different kinds of athletes and the different kinds of I think the best athletes have really like a blend. They are, in my opinion, like they need to be type A about some things, but they need to be type B about others. Like you said, they need to lean type A in some and then lean type B in others. And I think both could take, probably some, not advice really, but like some kind of, some of the attributes from each other to make like the perfect weapon, because in some of it's objectivity. I know a lot of like, some of your friends privately, you mentioned them on the podcast before, and I've got some that are like, they think you're, type Bs or even, type Cs or D, whatever. Like they tend to think type As are overly obsessive and they always have to get things done. They're the ones getting up to run on vacation. They're the ones, quote unquote vacation. They're the ones, always getting up. And they think that you're obsessed. But on the other side, if you're a person who's like way in the other direction, you're absolutely never motivated. You're too lax. You're too lazy. You're too nonchalant that you never get to that point. At the same time, it's like, and so I think you miss things on both fronts. And so if I'm an athlete trying to construct like my perfect, if I'm a coach and I'm trying to construct my perfect, because again, a lot of athletes look for, like you said, they look for a coach who's either somewhat similar in some ways, but most people don't look for the exact in both, because you're already getting that from yourself. You need someone to counterbalance. That's why I say opposites attract. Like type A's might look for type B's, type B's might look for type A's, but you have to have a little bit of both, I think, and in order to be the best version of yourself. But the most important thing is to understand and realize which one you are. And then understand, just like we talked about the flaws and the weaknesses that you have as an athlete, and you want to work on those, but also maximizing your strength. What I would say is, obviously you want to maximize your strength, but if you know your flaws as a person, like if and there's one athlete that I've had, I don't want to call it a breakthrough, but somewhat of a breakthrough with this year from a personality standpoint is, and I very, very, very rarely say like, I'm proud of this session or this is an incredible session, because I think we use that and like it's overkill. And then you get athletes to like depend on hearing that and they don't hear it. You think they're disappointed, but he finally took a red. And I said, this is the most proud of you I've been in the months we've worked together. And he was like, why? And I was like, because you made the decision knowing there would be a red. And this is the same kind of guy that like on the weekly athlete summary, make sure they put a 1 minute duration so they can then put a 1 minute completion to show the glee in the athlete summary. That is type A perfect example. And they took their, and I was like, that's the kind of version of you that I like to see, because you made the decision that it wasn't in your best interest physically, even though your personality was probably saying, please do it. Please do it. You got to do it. If you don't do it, you're a failure. If you don't do it, you're a quitter. Coach is going to be upset. You're not going to make it to the start line. You're not going to be the best version of yourself. You got to get it done. I can't imagine what my week will look like with like a red on there and an orange there. All the rest of it's green. Your mind saying that, and your body's like, please don't run. Please don't run. I am stressed out to the fucking max. We got no sleep. Your kid's sick. You got a deadline tomorrow for work. Like, we can run, dude, and you can get that green, but it's going to cost us and we're going to dig ourselves a hole. And so you have like those two competing personalities. And so for a type A personality to listen to their body in that way and be like, and to kind of have like the override button is a tremendous like show of progress. And I was like, dude, this is what I need to see. I could care less about like, because then what you're doing is you're not teaching, right? But you're encouraging that athlete now to work within the context of the day and understand that while there's a color associated to not doing it, the overall success is a green, right? It's a go. It's a perfect day. It was the best choice. And as a coach, like when you look at athletes continuously never missing, I always question if they're being truthful. Are you really being true? Because no athlete is perfect. No athlete never misses, right? And are you going too in the other direction and being, way too obsessive about it? And sometimes when they're really, really, when I find it like a type A athlete being like really, 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 really obsessive, then I do something or I say something that I'm like, you know what? I'm giving you a rest day. I'm giving you 2. You got to learn to sit with your feelings and sit with imperfection and sit with being flexible. Because if you don't, the longer you stay rigid, the more likely it is for you to really come to a breaking point because of that rigidity. And so, but also like on the same token, if you're a type B personality and you don't have that, maybe that next level of, commitment or motivation or attention to detail, then it's your job as a coach, I think, to maybe layer in some easy wins, right? We're just trying for momentum here. 30 minutes a day. Don't care what it is. Don't care if it's walking. Don't care if it's, it's walking your dog. Don't care if it's outside riding your bike with your kid. 30 minutes. And then visually they start to see like, all right, I'm seeing progress. I can do this for 30. And then you start to like, add things up. So sometimes I'll do little things like the athlete's been inconsistent, and on Monday they finally get back from the workout. I'll just do one simple comment and it's 1 for 1. And then the next day they do it and I'll put a little 2 for 2. And the next day they put up 3 for 3. And you're just kind of building a little momentum and kind of not a craving of being not overly committed, but overly type A about it, but creating some positive momentum. Like, you know what, I can do this. I am able to do this. But then again, like you have to tell people, like I told yesterday to an athlete, one of the athletes I coach who's I think like 32 weeks pregnant, legit, like never misses, like still training, still high level. And I just said, I don't like what I'm seeing. You're taking tomorrow off and don't argue with me about it. And it's really hard for people to switch it off on the same account. I've got another athlete, female, who has like a very, very demanding job in the medical field. And I just told her, I said, listen, I think we need to change up your training. I don't like the load we have right now with the amount of stress you have. And I'm just not seeing, not the results that I want to see, but I'm not seeing I'm seeing too much fatigue for the load that I'm giving. And so I want to adjust that. Again, that's on me, not the athlete. So I said, the next week I want to give you a day off or 2 days off even, and lower the training load and then see if we can get back. And so we did that last week, and I lowered the training volume, a day off or 2. And after like 3 or 4 days had gone by, she had moved workouts to where she hadn't had a day off yet. And I said, you got to take 2 days off. Like you got to find a day to take a day off. And because her running was coming back and it was a lot more springy and it was a lot better, and I could tell that the lighter load and the different intensity distribution was having a positive effect. And then she left a comment, which again is great insight from a type A person to be able to provide this level of context. And she just said, listen, I appreciate the change in intensity distribution, but I have to do something every day for my mental sanity. If I don't do it, then I get anxious and I get overly stressed. If I have like a surgery that day I've got to perform, I have to think through it in motion. And there's actually like studies out there about like, even this is like one of the very first studies I think I ever read when I got into the sport, was that it was like 5th or 6th graders that they retained their information better while pedaling on a stationary bike. So there's a lot of science and research that people tend to deal with a lot of different things, whether it's retaining information or dealing with their anxiety in movement, right? And so she just said, like, listen, when I have a big surgery that day, I've got to move or I just get super anxious and I just need to work through it. So as a coach, you're thinking, all right, that's type A, but I need to figure out a way for them to be a little bit type B in some areas. So you have to have like a happy medium. You have to, one, acknowledge the personality type and the needs someone has, because if you're like, no, you have to be more flexible and you have to take these days off. If that doesn't mesh with their personality, if that doesn't mesh with, whether a type A or type B, then you're going to cause more resistance. And your job as a coach is to cause the least amount of resistance as possible. And so you have to be, flexible in those ways and trying to figure out like, hey, all right, I see what you're saying. I see the need for this. So now it's your job to figure out a way to where, all right, we might not have a day or 2 off, but like maybe instead of 2 days off and even a day off, it's just something super light, like a 30-minute spin or a 45-minute walk, to where there's something on there for them to do that's structured, but you're still promoting recovery. And so, seriously, like I think as a coach, you battle an athlete's psychology sometimes more than you battle their physiology, and just trying to figure out what is going to work the best and how it's going to work the best for that specific athlete.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, when I start thinking about this type of topic, and, but like society always wants to put a label on everything. And, I do think most people have variations of all these qualities in them on some level. And I just have always believed that everything's sort of on a continuum. If you have type A as far to one side as and type B as far off to the other, that most people land sort of in the middle. So how do you kind of, you know, bring all that together and take the best of both worlds kind of thing? And who knows what the hell that even means. But, you know, like I think I sort of like flippantly described you that one time as flexible on the fuck around. And to me, that's like kind of, I don't know, you asked me about your personality or something, and that's what I came up with. And it was, but I think it's pretty accurate, you know, for sort of like a type A leaning type of person. And maybe that's just more the way to look at it, is sort of on that continuum. You know, I don't think anybody is like full on like 100% type A, but if they are, they're probably super rigid, and vice versa, lazy, whatever. So we need something for type B, like a, you know, button down, you know, or button down the boho or something like that, where it's like, because I tend to get, you know, a little bit, you know, kind of lazy. And it's sort of like, if you think of a type A person and you say, hey, you need to meditate for a while and just sit there and not do anything, probably drive them crazy. But sometimes I can get in that spot and be like, man, I need more of this. But I need to kind of jack it up a little bit. And I have to do that sometimes. Sometimes I, you know, like force myself to write lists and get a little bit more organized and bring myself more to the middle and take some of those, you know, I mean, because it's like, I just feel like sometimes it becomes like a natural tendency to sort of like brand something as good or bad. You know, it's like, this is a type A, and so I'm type B, so I'm going to resist all that over there. But I think there's, you know, it's like everything in life, man, you know, you see it now, everything's so divisive, man. It's like one side or the other. And it's like, come on, we have to kind of come together on all this stuff. And I think we can do that with ourselves, in the sense of just, because, I mean, there's nothing wrong with being competitive or ambitious and things like that. And there's nothing wrong with being a little laid back and easygoing too. So it's like, how do those things mesh and create the best approach to everything, you know? And one of the things that I've talked about many times is that how I appreciate when I see yellow on Training Peaks. And because to me, it was sort of like this, somebody made a decision, or they decided to back off, or they felt good and went a little bit the other way. And in some ways, I almost think it would be kind of interesting to see like 7 straight days of yellow, maybe with one day going over and one day going under, you know, just based on how they feel, and, you know, taking advantage of the moment or whatever, and not be so rigid to the exact, you know, prescription of everything, because, you know, sometimes we just need a little more and sometimes we need a little less. And I you know, it's almost like, you know, waking up and having the exact same, you know, eating exactly the same thing every day and exactly the same amount every day, and then doing a hard workout one day and an easy one the next, and that fuel might be too much one day and not enough the other. You know what I mean? So it's like, I just think we have to be a little bit fluid with our decision making, and, you know, able to embrace, you know, qualities that might not be our natural tendencies, but know that they can be good for us, you know? I don't know. I do know that, you know, sometimes my thinking patterns can get a little bit obscure and vague and things like that. But I also know that it helps sometimes when I can, you know, it's interesting. Like my dad's old boss went through AA. Like he went through it back when, you know, like it wasn't, you know, like it was really almost taboo. I mean, it was like in the 60s or so, you know what I mean? Like we feel like it was like, holy shit, that guy is, you know, like what? But I remember going down to watch him at work. He ran this old concrete company, and I go down and watch, and that guy was like, I think his head was, or his mind was kind of just all over the place. And, you know, he was, you know, obviously drinking a lot and, you know, whatever. But what he would do is like almost, it seemed like to me at the time, force himself to organize, because all he would do is sit there and like work on long math problems. It was super interesting, man. Like all day he would just kind of like work, and then he would stop, and then he would just like, you know, do all these like formulas and stuff. It was almost like organizing, you know, those disruptive thoughts or something like that. And I just resonate with that kind of complementary sort of behavior If I'm always just out winging it, sometimes it's great for me to have structure, but I don't always want it. But I think that there's value in either side of that equation.
Yeah, it's like hearing you say that reminded me of like when I went to treatment, like when this isn't a fad, but when I went to treatment, from what I remember too, both in and out of treatment and like in AA rooms and talking to people, like knitting and like cross stitching and crocheting was huge. Huge. You'd walk in, there's like, because rarely ever were like, did they like have males and females in the same room? You didn't see many dudes crocheting and like, doing, stuff like that. But you very rarely they would have, males, they would combine males and females for obvious reasons. Like some people are there for, sex addiction and other things. And so, but anyway, when they would have you in there, females on one side, men on the other side, at least 80% are doing some kind of cross stitch, some kind of crocheting, something. Actively listening, actively participating in whatever was going on, whether it was a speaker or something, or a program, whatever it is, they were still actively they'd respond, but they would like rarely ever look up. And and guys would have other things to do, probably not nearly as productive, but it was something they would just do for their like in their mind. They're like, I'm keeping my mind busy and focused on a task that is not detrimental or leading me down a path that's going to be, a distraction that's going to then lead me back to being anxious. This is going to lead me to wanting to drink. And then, it's like avoiding the rabbit hole as much as possible. And so, that's what made me think of like when you got to do is like doing these math problems or crossword puzzles even, like there's like things that I think we do and we pick up on. They're like, I need something to keep me busy. And I know a lot of people do this sport because they've got anxiety and depression and the ADD. Like it helps them manage that. Like, I mean, in some of the most anxious periods of my life, like it's been like some of the most heavy training I've ever done because it was my way of like dissipating the anxiety and dealing with it in a positive way. And you could be like, well, is that, what is that, type A or type B, whatever you're feeling, it's like, but I think we always have these tendencies on how to deal with things. And I think awareness really is just the best way to combat that. Right. And like you said, recognizing, do you lean one way or the other? Do you lean type A? Do you lean type B? And if you do, what do you recognize are areas that might be, an impediment to progress? Are you so type B that you just wing it on your nutrition plan? Probably. Is that ruining or having an enormous impact on your performance? Probably. Having said that, if you spent the time to be type A, to write out and to plan and to execute the perfect nutrition plan, do you also have the ability to then engage your primary trait, of being flexible and, a problem solver and go with the flow for when it doesn't go correctly? Right. On the other side, you got the athlete who's super type A, plans everything down to the ounce and the gram. And then all of a sudden the day before the race, they're like, oh, they changed the on course to this mortal hydration and my whole racing season's ruined. I've been going on course and I can't do this, or I dropped a bottle or they were out of stock at this and I thought I would get, and like, the feed couldn't get me my gels, the day before the race. What am I going to do? They freak the fuck out. Type B person's like, all right, well, that's a shame. Yeah, I guess let's kind of use this. And so like you look at the, in type A, maximum stressed, right? Type B is like, all right, not stressed. But then type B is also probably the one that didn't even have a plan. So it's, right? So it's hard to be disrupted if you don't have a plan. But so to me, it's like, do you need, maybe it's like the visual for the person is like, do you need to widen or narrow your guardrails? For the type A, you probably need to widen those guys. Be a little broader, be a little more flexible, give yourself more wiggle room, more margin for error, more margin for success. On the other side, if you're type B or type, whatever it is, like maybe you want to narrow that down just a little bit. Maybe you still want to be flexible, but at least let's have an idea. How many calories are in each scoop? No clue. I just do a couple scoops. Do you have any idea what's in those scoops? I've got no clue. All right, that's not a plan, right? We're just kind of throwing a dart at a dartboard with our blindfold and hoping that we hit the bullseye. Do you want them to feel over? It's also, I think, very similar to when people want to go on a diet and you download one of these like macronutrient calculators. I'd be willing to bet you the average life cycle for a person on like a macronutrient app is all of 6 minutes, all of one meal. Because it's so overwhelming, it's so stressful that you do it and you're like, I can't do this. I don't want to count protein. I don't want to scan labels. I don't feel like I'm going over. Now I'm going under protein. I'm going under in carbs. Now I've got too much fat. I got to redo the whole thing. I got to weigh my food. It's like overkill because they're already so rigid. They're like, oh, well, I'm so rigid. I need exactness. But then you put exactness in it and you're like, but this exactness doesn't fit right. It's like, trying to put a rectangle into a square hole. It's like it's similar, but they're both very rigid on the edges, but they're not perfect. And then they like overly fit. But you do it to a flexible person, they're like, whoa. I don't, who the fuck does this app think it is trying to tell me how many grams of protein I need and how much fat I need? This is fine. And they just kind of wing it. And then they just wing it. And then just wing it. And you can't figure out exactly like, and maybe they lost weight, but they can't figure out how they lost weight, so they can't repeat it. But the positive is that they lost weight, but the problem might be is that if they just keep winging it, maybe their personality is going to change and things are going to be different. Same thing for type A. The type A might get them to be so specific that they do lose weight, that they do change their body composition. But what happens if that stops working, right? Just like everything else does. You diet one way for one period of time, and then at some point it stops working. So I think that's something you have to, again, like for me, it's a good example of the pros and cons between each one. And you just have to be really, really aware of again, like the effects that it has on our ability to be successful, right? Just like things like being anxious and being depressed or being, mood swings, like all these things have an effect on our training. And so I think recognizing those and owning them is a really great step in order to maximize those strengths and just kind of limit, again, not the weaknesses, but some of the obstacles that we have on both sides, because they both present equal amount of obstacles in both ways.
Yeah. I mean, whenever you talk, about stuff like that, it just kind of goes back to, how you sort of described me at one point as being in the ballpark. That's how I look at shit like that sometimes, because I would lean towards, you were describing, 2 scoops, how much is it? I don't know. Sometimes I'm that way, but I kind of have like a range or something. I know that, throughout testing in its personal experience with different things, that that 2 scoops just seems to work for whatever reason. So it's sort of a little bit planned, but it's not too rigid. And I just think that there's a lot of, same with how I eat, and like, I just, I'll try to do these sort of specific things, and I'm like, wow, that does just kind of throw me off or something like that. And I'm thinking to myself, because I'm always like, who knows really what's right for you, and they'll tell you this is exactly what they did or whatever. And I just don't believe it a lot of times. I think that it's just sort of a sales pitch on some level sometimes. And I really do think that we have to kind of maybe use some, like you're saying, a guardrail, and just sort of kind of, weave it into what is your personality, what works for you. And, I do that with like food sometimes. I'll just make shit and just start eating it, and eat when I'm hungry, and not really pay attention to the calories and things like that. And sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't work. I was really on a good streak with that, for example. And I found out yesterday that I went up to get some gas, and so I got some coffee. And on the way out, I hadn't been eating a lot of sugar. And on the way out, for some reason, I grabbed one of those stupid apple pie things that was just sitting there, and I'm like, yeah, that sounds good right now. It's like, I ate it, and I noticed throughout the day that I was just craving sugar again. And it's, you know what I mean? It's like, it just sets you up. So, when I think about stuff like that, I'm like, all right, how do you set the tone for the day? And it's, you know, if you're starting with, you know, donuts and sugar and shit like that, I just think it regulates your thermostat or whatever. So, I don't know. I just try to pay attention to that kind of stuff. And I think a lot of times we just get so on that highway and just start buying into whatever. And just because it's a number, because it's a direction and stuff like that, but we don't, you know, I think I might overgo the other way sometimes. But I'm really in tune. I try to really be in tune with what's going on in my body. And a lot of times I just don't believe in a lot of things like that are coming at me. So I you know, I'm not saying it's not right or whatever, but I really just try to be in tune with what's going on. And sometimes when I go off the rail like that, honestly, I'm just talking about it now because I'll forget it otherwise. You know, like I just grabbed that apple pie and ate it. And then it just, like, to me, that's like an indicator. But it's so easy to not notice that, you know. It was like, no, it's not good for you. But why isn't it good? Because it sort of sets the tone for everything. So you can dabble, but, you know, just be aware of what's going on there, because, and I think it translates into training, sort of like how,
Sure,
you can start off on the wrong foot. And like, that's why I'm like almost a little leery sometimes of all this, all the gels and all that kind of stuff. I remember I used to, you know, be religious with that stuff. I'd have a gel before a, 30 minute run and, like get it, you know what I mean? Like all that kind of stuff. Now I just really try to think about, do I need that kind of stuff right now? And because I think more than anything, it may give you a little help, but I think it just sort of throws off a chain reaction sometimes. So that's really what I'm talking about, as far as like, do you really need that many calories, or do you have enough stored in you? Can you handle it? You're just dehydrated, or what's you need some more electrolytes. What's the situation going on there? And I think it's important to step back sometimes and really understand where you're at.
Yeah, I love that. I think, and we can close it out here, but there's, listening to you talk about, I think there's ways that both can set themselves up for success, right? And that's why, even coaches will say they need a coach, professional athletes will they need a coach. Like type A's like to have a coach because they get so stressed out about their own planning because they want it to be perfect. They spend more time actually making their plan than they do actually working on the plan. They're so obsessed with the perfection. They're so stressed out about the details. They're so stressed out about it being perfect that a lot of times they don't even get started. They want the perfect plan or the perfect training plan or the perfect everything. And so it's never going to be perfect. And so they get caught in this perfection cycle and really just need to get started and get it done. So removing that load and that mental load and stress from them having to do it, and the emotional attachment to, are they doing it right versus someone else is taking care of me? That's the one less thing on my plate. Check, give myself a coach. Same thing for type B. They don't want to plan it. They don't want to be exact. They just want to kind of wing it, but also understand that winging it only gets me so far. So if I want to get a little better, I probably have to have things a little more refined, but that's not who I am. So I'd rather be who I am and have someone else do the type A stuff for me. And so I think, again, like the best analogy I can give to where you're kind of like, peeking around the corner at a type A if you're a type B, is to not have to do it every day. And then again, that's where a coach comes in, right? It's like they're the one that plans out your whole week. You just have to get up and do it the best of your ability. You don't have to think about it. But like I consider meal prepping the perfect blend. You want to eat well for the week, but you sure as hell don't want to have to think about it and be exact with my portions and my macros and everything else every single day. I ain't got time for that. It's too stressful. And if it's too stressful, guess what? It ain't getting done, or I'm going to rebel. But on a Sunday, when stress is low, I don't have other things going on, I can be type A for like 2 or 3 hours. I can put some stuff in the Instapot. I can put some stuff in the oven. I can throw some meat on the grill. I can get all my portions out. I can get myself prepped. And I can be 2 or 3 hours of type A that'll allow me to be type B the rest of the week, but get type A results from the area that I need help in. Instead of having to wake up every day and be like, all right, now I got to make this from scratch. Like, Pinterest says it's going to take anywhere from like 10 to 15 minutes, but we sure as hell all know it's going to take at least 55 to 60. So, I don't have time for that. So let me go grab some processed food and something easy. But that's how I got here. And then you're like, this is too hard. It's not manageable. I can't do this. I quit. I'm fine being this way. So there's things we can do, right, to be successful on both ends, right? And as a type A athlete, maybe it's not being exact. It's like, hey, I got to give myself, I'm going to meal prep on Monday and I'm going to lay it out all the way through Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. But then the weekend, I'm going to have one cheat meal after a long ride and maybe my other cheat meal after my long run. Because I can't be too strict, because if I'm too strict, then I'm going to eventually be too obsessed about it. So you have to actually weave in the cheat day, because you're going to break if you don't. And so there's just a lot of things. You can do that with training. You can do it with, a lot of times we give structured rides. A lot of times it's just written. A lot of times it's up for debate. Like sometimes I'll give runs where I'm like, hey, the goal today is, 50 to 70 minutes. That's a long, long range. But then I might put in something like, goal is to stop when you feel like you have at least 5 to 10 more minutes left of good running. Up for debate, up for interpretation, up for what you feel like today. So a type A athlete might see it and be like, oh, that stresses me out. How many minutes? What TSS? What pace? What heart rate? I need to know exact. It's not pre-built. It's not going to look green. I'm panicking. And you're like, but make this decision. And so you can weave things in there, I think, again, on both ends, that, again, it's about narrowing the guardrails. It's about widening up the guardrails and just kind of, again, massaging them one way or the other, not forcing it, right? Not blunt force trauma one way or the other, but just massaging them to one way to see that they are capable. That way they can kind of go back on those experiences when it matters most, which for most people is on race day.
Mm. Yeah. And I think there's one thing I want to add is, like I was doing some type A meal prepping, and I'll do that. And I kind of was really doing good all week. And last night I was looking at that stuff and I felt like I wanted to puke. So I went out to the local restaurant and had an Italian beef and some fries. And I was like, damn it. But then, the bottom line was that, like, my biggest thing was, I was like, all right, you're doing this, but don't labor yourself in guilt right now, because it's just something that happened and tomorrow you get back on it. And now I feel like I'm back on it again. But I think a lot of, I think this might be a type B thing, but it's sort of like guilt of it. But then I could see how you're saying, if a type A doesn't get a workout done or doesn't feel like doing something, they don't do it. It's just, I always talk to athletes, it's like, don't feel guilty about that, man. Mm-hmm. You've been doing great. Just let it be something that happened and you get back on the horse tomorrow. But if you labor in that guilt for too long, you're going to start a pattern. And so, I don't know. That's just top of mind for me right now, because I know I do that a lot. I'll be like, that Italian beef, maybe I'll nail that tonight again. It's like, but no, I'm just going to kind of go back into where I was. It was just something I needed, a little bit of a break, a little chance to breathe there on the shitty food.
Listen, nothing wrong with that, man.
But everybody does it, and we all get like,
man.
It turns into a pattern. That's the problem, right?
Trunk cookies for life.
Trunk cookies, yeah. My God.
Trunk cookies
that
for life.
That strategy is so... It was a lot better when I actually had a trunk. Now it's like I got SUV things. It's like it's never really that too hidden.
Like, yeah, it's glove box gourmet apple pies, man.
I'm gonna have to have a cookie safe.
That's right. A little cookie safe in the
garage.
Yeah. Well, hopefully you don't have any more snow this weekend. Hopefully if you're out racing, you get good conditions. As always, love you guys. Appreciate you. Go to our website, c26triathlon.com. It is your one-stop shop for all things coaching, camps, and community. Looking for camps this year. We still have our Nashville camp coming up next month. Some of the best conditions and venues you can possibly imagine to train and race on. Again, that's in June. Then if you're looking to get out on the Wisconsin course, we have our very popular Wisconsin camp, which is at the end of July. So look those up. If you need any coaching help, look in the coach tab and peruse those coaches, see if one is right for you. And as always, if you need anything from Mike, he's available. Mike at c26triathlon.com. If you need anything from me, Robbie at c26triathlon.com.
All right, man. Well, have a great weekend.
You too, man. Check you later, dude.
I see you.